people who need to be diagnosed perhaps aren't being diagnosed, and then everyone's just self-diagnosing in the meantime and believing they have a condition that maybe they just don't.
Andy Burnham has signalled he wants to make it harder for people to claim disability benefits in order to cut the cost of welfare payments. One of the factors that politicians point to as partly responsible for the ballooning of those payments are the rising number of people being diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, though, some mental health experts are looking at whether some of those diagnosed with the condition could even or should be de-diagnosed. Charlotte Lytton has written about this in today's Sunday Times and joins us now. Good morning, Charlotte.
Morning.
You mentioned in your piece that we are at a sort of an unprecedented age of diagnosis. Talk us through how many of us have a classified mental health disorder.
So 1 in 5 people now have a classified mental health disorder. 1 in 7 consider themselves neurodiverse. So this is obviously a large rise in the numbers previously, and experts say that this is particularly notable within the past few years. So this is the reason it comes up as a discussion point quite frequently, and obviously now with the Prime Minister looking at the welfare bill, it's under scrutiny again.
Yeah, and so why is there starting to be a conversation about whether we should be looking again at some of these diagnoses?
So the de-diagnosis idea is off the back of a Swedish study that was done 3 years ago with 100 people who were diagnosed in childhood. And because ADHD was previously something that was thought only to apply to children, it was looking at whether these labels or the label for the condition still applied to those who got it as a child when they were adults. Was it still helpful? Did it describe their current state of being? Were they taking medication for something that they no longer needed to take it for? So this idea has been picked up by some psychiatrists and other experts in the field since then, and is now, it's still pretty on the fringes as an idea, but it's being discussed as something that could perhaps be worth looking at for the large numbers of people with conditions like this.
It's a difficult conversation to have, isn't it? To say to someone, a doctor has looked at you, assessed your condition, and yes, you've got this, which for many people that we've sometimes spoken to on this programme, that becomes very reassuring or comforting to then say later down the line, we're going to take that away.
Well, I think they're taking it away if they have been assessed and it shows that they are no longer in that same state of being. We know that things like ADHD and autism exist on a spectrum, and there are some people who are going to be incredibly severely affected and some people who maybe have it at the milder end. Labels are helpful for some people, but for other people, they aren't. The Swedish study found that having these labels actually caused them some difficulties, whether it was in their career or finding that they felt defined by it and that was limiting them in some other way. So it's not to say you feel this way and we're taking it away from you. It's an assessment to see whether it still applies.
So what is the implication of that they were potentially misdiagnosed the first time, or that they were cured or recovered from it?
I think it's a number of things, but one of the main ones being that if ADHD is something that is more prevalent in children, which is previously what was believed to be the case, that you might grow out of it, you might stop having those symptoms that really affected you. I spoke to a Swedish guy who was de-diagnosed. He had originally been diagnosed when he was 12, and he felt that the diagnosis even at the time had not been helpful for him. He was a 12-year-old high energy kid, is how he referred to himself. He didn't really like school, but he also said a lot of 12-year-old kids don't really like school. So perhaps at the time it's believed that these labels are helpful, but as people get older, maybe they just aren't useful in the way they were intended to be.
Also, the way people are getting the labels initially has changed significantly in the last few years. Lots of people are being influenced by content they see online and diagnosing themselves.
Yes, and that is not helpful. There is a process called looping where, you see people talking about it all the time. You see celebrity-backed campaigns and people sort of equating very minor symptoms such as scattiness and saying, oh, this is proof I've got ADHD, and posting a video to that effect on TikTok. That's not a clinical diagnosis. And so seeing something all around you all the time is perhaps more likely to make you think, oh, maybe I have that, than actually going through a clinical diagnosis and being told, yes, you have the symptoms that equate to this condition.
Yeah. Do we need a sort of, instead of de-prescribing, what's the word? De-diagnosing. Instead of de-diagnosing, do we need sort of de-influencing?
Well, it's a tricky one. I'm sure, as you mentioned previously, there are people who will see themselves reflected maybe in these influencers' content and think, wow, that really speaks to me. I don't feel like I need to hide this away anymore. But we know over and over again, studies show that the information where it concerns health on social media is largely wrong. And so the idea that people are seeing wall-to-wall coverage of conditions that are just riddled with information and then believing they have a diagnosis off the back of that is a concern.
Yeah, there's an interesting study that you write about in your piece from University College London. They had a 6-year trial, 32,000 children who were age 8 to 13, showed that normalising their feelings of sadness or stress rather than labelling them as specific conditions led to better results. That feels like that's obvious. What's changed that actually that isn't the sort of baseline assumption?
I think particularly with conditions like ADHD, there was a long time where it was going underdiagnosed. And so there's sort of been this pendulum swing, perhaps, where in the fear not to keep underdiagnosing, maybe the diagnoses are given out more widely than they would have been before. And so also in the bid to kind of normalise or accept these conditions and not wanting people to hide away from them, we're talking about them more. But some of the experts in the piece believe that this is going the other way, that we're sort of reminding people all the time that these diagnoses exist and actually just saying, hey, it's normal, especially if you're a child. Everything about childhood has changed. These feelings might be temporary. There's discomfort in life, but you can ride it through. For a lot of people, that could be an answer rather than having a label that they have forever, medication they have forever that actually doesn't serve them.
Do you think our politicians believe that? The former Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, had previously said that, Britain risks over-diagnosing mental health conditions and that ordinary sadness and worry were being turned into medical problems.
There are certainly experts who believe we're pathologising a lot of very normal feelings now. We've had a shift in cabinet, so yes, Streeting definitely believed there's an overdiagnosis issue, but who knows what the current government is going to make of that now. We know Burnham's talking about the welfare bill, but the matter remains that assessments for these conditions remain very long. People are on waiting lists for years. And so I think you get a bit of a stack up of problems here where people who need to be diagnosed perhaps aren't being diagnosed, and then everyone's just self-diagnosing in the meantime and believing they have a condition that maybe they just don't.
Yeah, and one of your case studies talks about sort of the freedom of liberation of having that diagnosis taken away. Charlotte, thank you. Charlotte Lytton, who's written about this in the Sunday Times today. We know, Nick, Andy Burnham said last week he was prepared to make it harder for people to claim disability benefits to try to cut what is right now a large and booming welfare bill.
That statistic right at the beginning of your interview, a fifth of all of us have classified as having mental health disorders. 20% of the people in this country have actual diagnosis. Well, I mean, that is not sustainable. And can it be right? I mean,
you've got to look at why that's happened.
And what effect that it has on people's productivity and ability to live normal and happy lives. But even so, just getting that diagnosis, if it becomes part of your identity, it can also become part of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very interesting to look at this, maybe this changing shift. You can have a read of Rebecca's piece online.